Today we're going to be all over the place. So strap on your seatbelts. We're going to go for a ride. Next week we're coming back to this topic, but next week we're going to land the airplane on Genesis chapter 15, and we're going to look at some of the practical consequences of being in covenant with God. We're going to be focusing this week and next on one of the great Bible words, covenant. Covenant runs through the story of the Bible. It keeps appearing at crucial moments throughout the narrative. I'm going to bring covenant on stage in a moment, and we're going to look at it in different settings. But first I need to introduce the story of which covenant is a part, because it's our story. At least we're characters in this story, so we'd better understand it. You cannot make sense of your life until you know what story you're in. The curtain rises on a being of unimaginable power, speaking the universe or multiverse or whatever it is into existence, speaking something, everything, out of nothing. He creates a perfect world and then creates perfect people to take dominion over it. That is, to steward it for him in wisdom and love. But he wants these people to do this of their own free will. That's the only way this is going to work. And so he allows them to choose. And they choose wrong. That's Genesis chapter 3. Instead of choosing to submit to God, they set themselves up to be his equals. So you remember the nature of the temptation. The serpent says to them, "Oh, God told you not to eat this fruit because he knows if you do, you will be like him." The people choose to go their own way, not God's way. And it is a disastrous choice. The moment they choose not to be under God, they begin scrambling to be above each other. So the so-called battle of the sexes began as a rebellion against God. But as is so often the case, the rebels betrayed each other. God kicks them out of the perfect earth program and exiles them from the garden training center. But, and this is really important, he does not give up on the plan. In some theological constructs, he throws the plan out and starts all over again. I think those misunderstand the situation. God still intends to have a perfect world, stewarded by perfect people, ruling in his name with wisdom and love. So that was Genesis chapter 3. The next 1,184 chapters of the Bible tell us what God is doing to make his plan a reality. In the final 2 chapters, for which the stage is already being set, we are back in a perfect world with perfect people who live with the perfect God. So those are the broad outlines of the story that we're in. Let me set the stage for the first act. Each act will feature a different covenant of God. This first act features the covenant with Noah. So Adam and Eve have already rebelled, Genesis chapter 3. They've made the disastrous, dolorous choice, and they've been exiled from the garden. Now, chapters 4 through 11 of Genesis display the consequences of that choice. So next time you read through Genesis, you read up to the disaster in chapter 3, and then see what happens after that as humanity goes off the cliff. So in chapter 4, Adam and Eve's oldest son kills his brother out of envy. The rejection of God in chapter 3 has led to the hatred of people in chapter 4. Next, in the same chapter, Lamech appears on stage. He is arrogant, chauvinistic, violent, a descendant of Cain who killed his brother. Like his ancestor, he murders someone, but he doesn't try to hide it. He boasts about it. That's what Adam's and Eve's choice looks like after just 8 or 9 generations. The downhill slide has just begun. In chapter 5, we see the words, "and he died," repeated 8 times. And he died, and he died, and he died, and he died. This is what St. Paul was talking about in Romans when he wrote that death reigned from the time of Adam. Death is our reality because of Adam and Eve's disastrous choice. In chapter 6, we have the very strange story about the sons of God who took the daughters of men. It is hard to know what to think of that story, but the author tells us what God thought of it. The Lord, this is chapter 6, verse 5, saw how great man's wickedness on the earth had become, that every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil all the time. In chapters 7 through 8, we read about the flood, which was a kind of cosmic reset point. It's clear that God is restarting the perfect earth program with Noah and his family on a sanitized earth, for he gives them the same instructions that he gave Adam. So this is chapter 9, verse 7. And this is where the first of those divine covenants is made. God enters into a covenant, a solemn agreement that forms a kind of partnership. So remember that. Covenant is a solemn, the most solemn agreement that forms a partnership between parties. God enters into covenant with Noah, and not just Noah, but with every living thing. Now, every covenant is built around a promise. And in this covenant, God promises never again to destroy the earth by water. And as a sign of the covenant, each covenant will have some kind of a sign. God places a rainbow in the sky. So when you see a rainbow, you're looking at a covenant sign, the covenant that God has made with Noah. Each covenant is also sealed by a sacrifice. So the first thing that we see Noah do when he gets off of the ark is to offer a sacrifice to the Lord. And then while we're not told this, we can expect this. The people did what they do with sacrificial food. They ate it, a sign of entering into covenant with the other party. By the way, marriage is a covenant, and marriage has a sign of the covenant. This is the sign of the covenant of marriage, a ring. And though we don't offer a sacrifice, we have a covenant meal at most weddings. People have a wedding reception. Maybe we'll talk about this next week, but marriage is shot through with language of covenant all the way through it. All right, the covenant with Noah is the first of 5 covenants. The second is with Abraham. So I'm doing a flyover today. We're going to just look down and see this and this and this, and we're going to move quickly. The second covenant is with Abraham. Let me set the stage again. After the cosmic reset, the perfect earth program goes off the rail very quickly. The people tasked with restoring the earth begin to ruin it again. The problem, as St. Paul points out in Romans chapter 5, is sin. It's that powerful, almost gravitational-like force, universal, that Adam's disobedience introduced into the world, a force that pulls people away from God. It doesn't work. This is the awful thing about it. It doesn't work outside of a person's will. That would be bad enough. It works from within their wills. Within 5 generations of the reset, the world is again on the verge of chaos. In chapter 11, the Tower of Babel incident replays what happened in chapter 3 in the garden. Humans are once again attempting to take God's place. Now, you might think that God would just give up on humanity, but God is not a quitter. He sticks to the plan. Perfect world, lovingly overseen by gracious, wise human beings. That was the plan from the beginning. So in the beginning, Genesis chapter 1, be fruitful, God says to Adam and Eve, and increase in number. He's going to tell Noah to do the same thing in chapter 9. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and over every living creature that moves on the ground. Not as some kind of tyrant and autocrat, but as those who are the image of God, loving every creature. That's still what God intends. But how can that possibly happen when humans are constantly being pulled away from God by that powerful anti-God force that Adam let loose in the world? Well, God has a plan. God always has a plan. He has never once been stumped. God selects one man from all the rest of humanity and puts him and his descendants through a training program for the next 2,000 years in order to bring blessing to all the peoples on earth. That brings us to the next covenant. So the next covenant is the covenant with Abraham, covenant 2. After the debacle at Babel, God chooses this one man, Abraham, enters into covenant with him. There's always a promise in covenant, and God promises this man that he will bless all the nations on earth through him. That's Genesis 18:18. Abraham's responsibility, and there's always some kind of responsibility for the covenant partners, is to direct his children and his household after him, to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just. Now, we'll get to the next covenant in a moment, but first I want to go backwards and point out something interesting in this one. When God calls Abraham in chapter 12, he uses the language of blessing in his promise. So these are verses 2 and 3 of Genesis chapter 12. Listen for the blessing words. There'll be 5 of them. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you, this one man. There are 5 blessings in this passage, which is significant because there are 5 curses in the 11 chapters that lead up to this passage. God is putting us on notice that he intends to undo the curse that Adam brought down on our heads through this man and his descendant or his seed. The first of those 5 blessings is, I will make you a great nation and I will bless you. So that means descendants, lots of descendants. The second, I will make your name great. So we're seeing the curse being undone. The people at Babel, if you remember that story, read it, chapter 11, try to make a name for themselves, but they only succeed in making Babel a byword and a term of derision. Unlike the people of Babel, Abraham does not try to make a name for himself. So God makes one for him. The third blessing in Hebrew is an imperative that's often missed. You will be a blessing. See, God doesn't bless people so that they can soak it in. He blesses them so that they can pass it on. If you've been blessed, it's because God wants you to bless others. But whom do we bless? Well, just look at the people God has placed in your life. At home, spouses, children, next door, friends and neighbors, at school, at work, here, at church. These are the people that you're to bless. I will bless those who bless you is the fourth promise. And the fifth is the capstone. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Little old Abraham living in the Middle East. I will bless all peoples on earth through you. That promise is so important. God doesn't want us to miss it. It's repeated 5 times in Genesis. Here in chapter 18, verse 18, 22, 18, 26, 4 through 8, 28, 14. Through Adam, all the peoples of earth are cursed. Through Abraham, all the peoples on earth will be blessed. Abraham is God's answer, more precisely, the beginning of God's answer to Adam. Now, I already mentioned that each covenant has a sign. The sign of the covenant with Abraham is circumcision. That's why all of Abraham's male descendants are required to be circumcised. As the story continues, Abraham's family grows, and the covenant is imperiled repeatedly. I mean, first of all, the promise of descendants is threatened by infertility. You can read how God solved that problem. The promise of land is threatened when Abraham leaves the land to live in Egypt. So if you're reading the story and you know about covenant, you say, oh no, Abraham is leaving the land. That would have been, by the way, a disaster had God not intervened. Later, Abraham's entire family leaves the land and goes to Egypt, every last one of them. And it looks as if God's promise has failed. Over the next 400 years, the family grows into a large ethnic minority and is forced into slave labor. Because the state profits from that labor, they refuse to let those people go back to their own land, which would have fulfilled the covenant promise. But God intervenes again. That's the Exodus. And that's detailed in Act 3, which brings us to the next covenant, the covenant at Sinai. So even though Abraham's family is now a small nation, they are still expected to fulfill Abraham's part of the covenant by keeping the way of the Lord, doing what is right and just. They've been set apart for that very purpose in preparation of bringing the blessing bringer. But after 400 years in Egypt, they don't know the way of the Lord. They don't know what's right and just. So God initiates a new covenant that comes with instructions on doing what is right and just. If they follow those instructions, God promises that they will be his treasured possession. This is Exodus 19, verses 4 and 5. A kingdom of priests bringing blessing to the rest of the world. Israel immediately adopts the covenant, and they do so with a sacrifice, that's Exodus 24, and a covenant meal. And by the way, I can remember reading Exodus 24 years ago and thinking, what on earth is that? So the 70 elders of Israel go up on the mountain with Moses and Aaron, and there we read these words, they saw the God of Israel, and they ate and drank. And that just sounded so weird to me. It sounds like they went to the movie, they saw the movie, and they ate popcorn. What on earth is going on here? But this is a covenant sacrifice and the meal of covenant. It's a covenant meal they're engaged in. God gives them the promised instructions. It's known as the Book of the Covenant. It comes at the front with an abstract. So you ever read academic papers, right? At the front, there's an abstract that tells what the paper's going to be about, a kind of overview. Those are the 10 Commandments in Exodus chapter 20. But Abraham's family proves no better than Noah's family at keeping God's ways. They don't even try at times. And it's the same old problem, that powerful force that is constantly pulling people away from God. Bible has a shorthand word for that. It's called sin. Okay, now we got to fast forward several centuries. I told you this is a flyover. Next major covenant between God and humans is the covenant with David, one of the descendants of Abraham. He belongs to the family of the patriarch Judah, who was the great-grandson of Abraham. God makes a covenant with David. God's covenant promise, and this covenant guarantees that David will always have a son, a descendant, to sit on the royal throne. And it goes even beyond that and promises to give one of David's descendants a kingdom that lasts forever. David's responsibility in this and that of his descendants is to be faithful to God by keeping the covenant at Sinai. Will they do any better than the rest of Abraham's descendants? The answer is no. I mean, there are some outstanding examples of faithfulness in David's line. There's Jehoshaphat and Joash and Josiah and Hezekiah, but most of his descendants turn away from God. And in the end, things get so bad that God exiles them from the covenant land, just as he had exiled Adam and Eve from the garden. And things are so terrible that it looks as if God has given up. But God does not give up. After 70 years, Israel returns to the covenant land. But here's the thing, there's no king on the throne. In fact, there's not even a throne. The country spends the next 500 years under the thumb of larger nations. Yet all that time, God is protecting David's line. It's a fascinating story in 2 Chronicles. At the very end of 2 Chronicles, you get this wonderful part where God has saved one person from David's line, Jehoiakim, even though he's gone into exile. And there God protects him and his descendants who come back to Israel in 70 years and play a major role in what happens. But God is not just keeping his promise to David. He's keeping all of his promises. His promise to Abraham to bless all the peoples of the earth. Now, we're going to get to that last covenant in just a moment. Before we do, we need to go back to something that happened during the exile. Most Jews are just trying to get on with life. I mean, they have no real hope of ever seeing a descendant of David on his throne again. They don't even think about it anymore. They're just doing life. That's when God issues a press release, or you could call it a prophetic word, announcing that one final covenant is coming. It's in the works. It's called the New Covenant. It's found in Jeremiah chapter 31 and then restated in Hebrews 8, which was read for us this morning. That is actually the longest Old Testament quote in the New Testament. This is important. I'll read it from Jeremiah, though. Jeremiah 31, starting with verse 31. This is the covenant. I will start with verse 33. This is the covenant I will make with the house of Israel after that time, declares the Lord. I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. That, by the way, is always the plan. You come to Revelation chapter 21, and you see God say, again, I will be their God. No longer will a man teach his neighbor or a man his brother, saying, know the Lord, because they'll all know me. From the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their wickedness and remember their sin no more. God prefaces this covenant in Jeremiah by saying it will not be like the covenant at Sinai. People failed to live up to their responsibilities in that covenant, just like all the other covenants. That gravity-like force with its constant pressure kept pulling people away from God. But this new covenant would be different. Instead of a law on stone tablets, God would put it in people's minds, write it on their hearts. In the new covenant, God promises to work from within people. And then they'll know him. Their sins won't be able to pull them away from him. This is not just a new in time covenant. This is a new in kind covenant. Some people remembered it, even years later. They didn't forget Jeremiah's announcement that this new kind of covenant was coming. Is it possible that God would not give up on them? Would he still keep his promise? Might David still have a descendant to reign on his throne? All right, now we got to fast forward once more. This time, we're going to Passover. At Passover, even cynical, disillusioned Jews could hope that God would keep his promises. On this Passover, pretty much everyone in Israel is crowded into Jerusalem for the great festival. See, back in Exodus, people were told that for Passover, you have to come to Jerusalem. But the nation had grown so large that you couldn't fit everybody in Jerusalem. So for the week of Passover, Jerusalem's boundaries, the city limits, were expanded enormously to be able to take in everybody in the country. So every room in the city is filled with people keeping Passover. In a borrowed room, Jesus and his disciples gather to eat the traditional Passover meal. They sip and pass the 4 cups of wine at set times throughout the meal. They dip the bitter herbs in the charoset, the sweet sauce. They read from Exodus and from Deuteronomy and from the Psalms as prescribed. And then Jesus, who acts as host, picks up the bread, but he doesn't do what's expected. He doesn't repeat the prayer that's said over the bread. Instead, he surprises everyone by breaking it as he says, "This is my body given for you." Later, when he raises what I think was probably the 3rd of the 4 cups of wine, and I say that because St. Paul calls it the cup of blessing. And in the Seder, the 3rd cup is the cup of blessing. As he raises the cup of wine, he again goes off script. He says, "This cup," now catch this, "is the new covenant in my blood." Remember, every covenant is ratified by a sacrifice. Do you see what's happening? The covenant-keeping God is fulfilling his promise, fulfilling all his promises, and doing it through Jesus. He is, and Matthew makes a big point of telling us this, takes verse after verse after verse to show it. He is the descendant of Abraham, through whom blessing comes to all the people of the earth, including you and me. He is the faithful Israelite who keeps the law given at Sinai. He is both God's priest and king. He's David's son, for whom the eternal throne is waiting. Do you see what's happening? The brilliant, patient, magnificent God never gave up on his plan. And he never gave up on us. He will still have a perfect earth, ruled by perfect people, under the providence of his perfect love. That is the story that you and I are in. We've wondered what kind of story it is. Is it a tragedy or is it a comedy? Is it an adventure? Is it a mystery? Yes. But most of all, it is a love story. The story of the God who so loved the world that he gave his only son. The hero of the story is the seed of Abraham. the faithful Israelite, the Son of David, and beyond all comprehension, the Lamb of God slain before the foundations of the earth. And by the grace of God, he is our Lord Jesus Christ. Now let's pray.